So now what I want to do is just show you a little bit about how I'm going to fix this area in here. Now, if you recall from the earlier here, I was wiping some of this off and I got a little bit nuts with it, and so I wiped away a little too much of the wash. Now, in this case, I could take some of this wash that I already have and I can just kind of paint it in this area, and it does okay, but I may have to apply several coats like this, and so I'm just wiping it in exactly into the areas where I want it and just kind of feathering it on the edge there. But all of this, because it's so wet, it's going to run down, it's going to pool right up underneath here, and I can see that happening right now. So what I can do is I can actually just wipe off my brush here, just dry it off a little bit, and then I can come back underneath it here and just touch this and wick all of that extra wash off, because I don't want it building up anymore underneath his pectoral muscles. So I could do that and kind of work with this a little bit, or what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take just a small sample of my wash here, and really what I want to do is thicken that up. Now, how do you thicken up a wash? I mean, honestly, there's not a precise way to do this, but what we'll do is I'll take just a touch of this black, and it is quite literally, I'm going to do this left-handed. I'm a right-handed person, I'm not ambidextrous. Put like 1 drop, maybe 2 drops, something like that. Do the same with the brown here, because once again I'm trying to keep this not just black. I want to have this kind of warm tone to it, so add a couple of drops of that in there. You can see it's real science. I'm very mathematical and precise with my measurements here. But what that's going to do is just thicken this up a little bit. And I may have to do a little more than that. Another way to do this is just leave your wash out overnight, a couple of nights maybe. That'll thicken it up for sure. But if you're pressed for time, just mix original base colors back into it, that thicker paint. And so now it's going to thicken this up. And while the consistency or the viscosity maybe is not super thick like regular paint, it is just a little bit heavier. And so now what will happen here is it should stick a little better. So see here, it's not going to run quite as much. Now it's still going to run because it is still very thin paint, but it's going to stay in place here. And so now I can really just kind of paint this in. If you had an airbrush, you could just shoot it in here and it'll dry almost instantly on contact. And I love working with airbrush, I really do. But not everybody has one. And sometimes it's just not called for. I can handle this without my super expensive airbrush over there. I can do it without it. And I can hear my airbrush over there whimpering with that comment. But all I'm doing is just kind of touching up these areas where I thought, well, maybe I wiped away a little too much. I'm trying not to get into the darker recesses. What I'm trying to do is build back up just these light areas. And so all I'm doing is just kind of touching in these little areas. And let me zoom in on this, because I've got another area here where I can do this and you can see it. So I'm going to zoom in here. Okay. And let's see here. I've got a couple spots here. All right, so let's say right here on his hip. Right here. You see how it's really light and all of a sudden it gets really dark. Okay. So what I want to do is kind of blend this area in, because I've got a hard line here. Now I could try to wipe that hard line away, but then this whole area would get lighter, and I really just want to make this a little darker. So what I'm going to do is just kind of paint right up next to that hard line. I'm just going to blend this in as best I can. Okay. And so that whole blending idea, that's an awesome thing that you can do with an airbrush. But guess what? I can do it with a brush. Airbrushing, not a challenge for me, and I'm not saying that as being cocky or anything like that. It isn't, because when I started painting models, that's the first purchase that I made was an airbrush, and I started using it right away. So I've clocked a lot of hours with it. Now, am I the best at it? Absolutely not. There's certainly people out there that are better at it than me, but I see the work that people do, and it's like, yeah, that's awesome, but can you do that with a regular paintbrush? That, to me, is the challenge. And a lot of these folks can't. So, I don't know. I like to challenge myself, try different things, and the regular paintbrush here is one of those. So I can do something like this, and it can kind of paint this in, and now that's going to dry, and it's going to set up in that area, and I can go back over this again and again if I need to. But when the brush leaves the surface here, it actually leaves a little extra drop of paint behind. We don't get that with an airbrush, you know. So this is where, you know, it's a different set of challenges. You know, airbrushing has its own set of challenges. Painting with a regular paintbrush has its own set of challenges. So what I've done is I've rinsed my brush out, and I'm just going to dry it off a little bit. But I do want the brush relatively wet. Now, it's just got water in it right now, and so now I can blend that edge even more. So I just go in here where I see it, and I just kind of blend that in even more. Awesome. Love it. I guess you know, I used to love watching Bob Ross. Now you can love him or hate him. I loved to watch him. He was entertaining, if nothing else. And he used to always say, you know, happy little clouds or whatever. I guess my little catchphrase is going to be awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, so hey, there's my tribute to Bob. All right, so just kind of working these little areas. Once again, trying to stay out of the shadow areas, trying to just fix these little edges. Just kind of dotting it around in here. Happy little shadows, happy little shadows. You know, here's another little spot here. I'm just kind of dot some of this in here. Because when I pick up on this brush, it's going to leave a little extra dab of paint there. And just kind of blend it in. Just like that. Beautiful. I just think that whole area right there just needs to be a little darker. So, you know, I can just go back to my wash here. And just pull a little of that in there. And as that dries, you know, you can use a hairdryer if you want to dry this a little faster. You can just keep building up these coats, and it's kind of like targeted washing here. Instead of just sloshing it everywhere, I'm just targeting exactly where I want the color to be. And it's just help leveling this stuff out. Okay, so just kind of keep working my way around here. See, I got in a little spot. Now, some of that is okay because, you know, if you go to a museum and you take a look at some of the bronzes that are in there, you know, some of that does happen. You know, the bronzes get cleaned, and, you know, just like me wiping the tarnish off here or the wash off here, it does happen. But, you know, if it's a little too stark for you, just apply a little of your wash over the highlighted areas. And it will dull them down, just as pretty as you please. I'll rinse my brush out here, and with just water in it, just going to blend along that edge, and bang, it's done. Like I said, airbrush. You can create this effect because you're applying, you're pulling back on the trigger to see how much air and then how much paint you're distributing at any given time, but you know, you have to do that a little differently with a regular paintbrush, but I can create that same kind of subtle transition with a paintbrush just by using water. Another technique there would be to pre-wet the area. Wet it down with water first and then apply your paints to it, and that paint will start to distribute. If you've never done it before, that's a technique we use in watercolors. I used to be a 2D artist before I started doing all this computer stuff. I was a 2D artist. I was an illustrator and a painter, and traditional illustrator, not using a computer, using pen and ink, using paints, that sort of stuff. So a lot of this kind of comes from there, and it works. You know, yeah, this is a 3D object, but it still works. Concept is still the same. Putting paint on a medium here, pretty simple. There you go, beautiful. So, you know, I'll probably go over this a little bit more with this, but I mean, look at that. Look, I've just settled all of that in there now. It's beautiful. It's a nice natural. There's a little bit of blotchy going on because it's getting rubbed and brushed up against there, but it's not too much. It's not too busy. It's a lot more subtle now, and it looks more like a real piece of metal. So there you have it. Kind of solving some of those issues here. And I'll probably go through this and look at any more issues that I may have and fix those. And then I'll be done with it. The next step would be to go back in and add a patina coat. And so the patina is going to be the super bright green. The Victorian green is what I'm going to use for this. And this one is going to be very much a controlled wash. I'm not just going to slosh it on everywhere. It's going to be very much a controlled wash so that I can control exactly where that goes. So I just got a little bit more in here. I can't leave it alone. Obsessive compulsive, that's me, and that is kicking in right now, like severely. So trying to get this just perfect. All right, so that's it for this one, guys. In the next video, this guy will be finished. Our coating will be done, and we'll move on to our patina coat, because you definitely want to check that out. That's the finishing touch there to really sell this thing as a piece of metal and not some piece of plastic or resin that you have painted to look like a piece of metal. So that's it for this time. We'll see you next time around.